Hi, I'm Sally Jane Black. I'm with the Louisiana Women's Action Committee. I confess that until a few days ago, I didn't know that the Louisiana Violent Crime Taskforce existed, but once I learned of it, I felt compelled to look into it. As a woman in Louisiana, one of the biggest violent crimes that I'm concerned with is domestic violence. There is an epidemic of domestic violence, of violence against women in the state. And I was appalled when I looked up who was on this task force because the majority of it is law enforcement or people with ties to law enforcement. And as somebody who advocates for the rights of women, advocates for a better world for women, I am well aware that the last people who are there to help victims of domestic violence are the police. I can certainly cite the statistic that is well known that 40% of police officers in the United States have a history of domestic violence. So putting law enforcement on a task force to fight violent crime, which should include domestic violence, that's the fox guarding the henhouse. But add to that just anecdotal evidence. I can cite my personal friend who was a victim of domestic violence so severe she suffered brain damage. And afterward, when she tried to get a restraining order, which was a trial all its own, part of that was that the courts required that the man who had abused her would have his guns taken away, but instead the police simply brought them right back to him, brought those guns right back to him. She lived in fear for her life, and she's lucky to have survived, as most women who escape domestic violence do end up being killed. On the flip side of that, most women who stand up to domestic violence, who stand up for themselves, who fight back, those women end up in prison. Those women get charged with violent crimes. It's horrifying that you take the, it's easier to go to jail for standing up for yourself as a woman than it is if you're abusing a woman. The same thing can be said for rape statistics. It's easier to go to jail for fighting back against your rapist than it is if you are a rapist. This isn't a matter of needing more training or more money for the police or higher arrest rates. The problem are the police in this situation. The problem is the system in this situation. It is designed to terrorize women. That was made abundantly clear when many of you who are here voted to criminalize abortion a few years ago. The whole point of criminalizing abortion isn't to preserve life, as many of you claim, but instead to force women into situations where they are financially dependent on men, where they are unable to free themselves from these circumstances, to make sure that women are desperate and afraid and therefore must turn to whatever resources they can, which would include jobs that pay the lowest. And that's very clear in this state where the wage gap between men and women is so wide, especially between Black women and Latina women who make less than half of what white men do. And it's abundantly clear that you're not interested in addressing this situation because instead of putting forth programs, instead of putting forth bills that would help women become more independent and not have to suffer at the hands of violent men, instead of putting forth programs that would help women in these circumstances or to generally help women or workers in this state to reduce the conditions that Joseph pointed out, the vast poverty and other problems that we're facing, the rising rents, the rising insurance rates, everything that traps us. You've put forth bills to fund more prisons and put forth bills to fund more police, to make it harder for people to access programs that they need. This committee is a complete fraud. Y'all aren't here to help anyone with preventing violent crime. You're here to ensure it. And I could not sit back and not come here and have that said, because when I learned of this committee, as I said, I was truly appalled to learn who was on it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you both for your comments. I would only have one more card, but it's got two names on it, Lynn Stevens and Patricia Williams.